Good day, friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video will continue our discussion of the Pope and the understanding of the Orthodox Church and just true understanding, truth in general of how we rightly divide truth in the Church and why I, as an Orthodox Christian who has associations with the Catholic Church, have chosen to become Orthodox as opposed to becoming Catholic. And I'm going to adjust this camera just a little bit. A little better. So, earlier parts in this series centered on aspects of early ecumenical councils, of the teachings of the pre-Nicene fathers, or the Nicene the church fathers that came before Nicaea, pre-Nicene fathers, and as well as the scripture itself, and why I do not believe that the Vatican I, Vatican II understanding of what the Pope is, or how the Pope's authority extends to the rest of the church outside of the jurisdiction of Rome, why I do not accept this. I do not believe that it's true. I can't accept it. It's not what's been handed down from the apostles. And so some of that came from The Church and the Pope by Robert Spencer. It's a great book, very short book, not very long, very inexpensive, and available on Amazon through Uncut Mountain Press. And I also had some references, I think, to Father Florovsky, as well as I recommended that you check out videos by Ubi Petrus, as well as Orthodox Christian Theology, Craig Tregulia. So this video, however, will center on the Celtic Church, and I will be referencing some from the Ecclesiastical History of the English People by St. Bede. And so this will be coming from the second book within St. Bede's Ecclesiastical History. So there's multiple books contained within this book, and it's chapter 2. And what is going on in this interaction is that St. Augustine of Canterbury, not the more popular, more well-known Augustine of Hippo, but Augustine of Canterbury was sent by St. Gregory, the Bishop of Rome, to the English people. Early in the church, the apostles, well, not the apostles, but the 70, Aristobulus of the 70 had made it to the land of the English, what we now call the English. At the time it was the British, the Britons, those Celtic Britons. And so even before him, Joseph of Arimathea is reported to have made it to that land preaching the gospel as well, and died shortly after having been there. So they actually begin these earlier communities, the earlier church that existed. So as the English people, the Angles, that is, as they begin to conquer or marry into or purchase or colonize parts of what we now call England, they kind of supplanted those earlier populations of people. So there were already Christians living in the British Isles, in the land we now call England, prior to Augustine of Canterbury coming there. So when Augustine is sent by St. Gregory, he goes not to those Celtic Britons, but he goes to this English people. And there's a king named Aethelbert. And he is a king ruling in the area, a very powerful king, apparently, because he drives back even the Irish that were settled in the land there. So you see multiple groups all gathered together. And that is the kind of historical backdrop of what takes place. And what we'll end up cueing in on in this passage is his interaction as someone who has been brought up in the Roman tradition and who represents the Bishop of Rome under St. Gregory. This time I think he was originally sent there by St. Gregory. I think St. Gregory has recently passed away by the time this interaction occurs. So I'm not sure who the Pope is at that time. But what I'm kind of going to draw out is that the Celtic Church, the church associated with the Celtic Britons and the Irish and these other groups that lived in the British Isles, they did not see things from the perspective that because the Bishop of Rome has ruled on this, that they were immediately expected to follow it. So the Celtic Britons, the Celtic Church, was not the modern Catholic understanding of the Catholic Church. So they would have argued that they are the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And as an Orthodox Christian, I would have agreed with them. That is part of my church. St. Gregory, the Bishop of Rome, is part of my church. But so on both aspects, when St. Augustine of Canterbury, when he speaks to them, he doesn't say, oh, the Bishop of Rome made this claim or has done this, and it's a settled case, therefore you have to submit to his authority. So he doesn't see that as an argument to be made. And then likewise, the Celtic Britons, as they are told by a representative under the Bishop of Rome that they wanted them to follow their own church calendar, that they did not see this as, oh, well, because the Bishop of Rome has spoken, we have to follow this. This was not part of church tradition. This was not part of the understanding of the church. And likewise, as an Orthodox Christian, I believe that we follow the tradition that has been handed down from the apostles. I don't believe this exists neither in the Catholic Church, nor does this exist in the Protestant churches, of which there are many today. This exists only in the Orthodox Church, and that is why I have chosen to become an Orthodox Christian, because that seed of faith that was planted by Christ and the apostles still exists today. The gates of hell have never have they prevailed against the church, as Christ prophesied and said. So Protestantism is not true, because the church did not have to restart. The church did not have to resume, as many Protestants claim. And then the seed of faith that existed, it did not exist under one bishop who ruled over all through supremacy, as the Catholic Church would claim. This is a communion of bishops who represent the inheritance, the passing down of the apostolic faith. And that is what I will be bringing out in this particular video, as it's represented here in the Celtic Church, and as I have described it in previous videos. So bear in mind that as you hear some of these terms in here, like Catholic, it is not referring to the Catholic Church with a capital C, as if it were a title, but it is referring to the fullness of the church, the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. So the Orthodox Church would claim that we are uniquely this successor. We are the one holy Catholic, lowercase c, as in the fullness of the church. The katholo, a Greek word meaning the fullness, that is complete. The church is complete in the Orthodox Church. And so I don't mean this to be a slam against our Catholic friends, our Catholic I guess we could say brothers in a way. I don't know that we can. There is a break in communion between us, and until that communion is healed, and until the things that separate the church has been healed, I don't know that we can actually call them brothers and sisters, but I would long to, because I see in the students that I taught, their families, and very pious Catholic people that I interact with, I do see some common faith and some common piety between those particularly traditional Catholic people and Orthodox Christians. But until we are in communion, which I pray that eventually the heresies of the church will be repented from, and that's why I make these videos. So I am not a clergy person, I'm not an expert, I'm just an Orthodox Christian layperson who wants the truth and wants the fullness of the church to not only come in me, but also to be in all of you as well that watch these videos. So without further ado, or gilding the lily, so to speak, I will begin reading in chapter 2. So meanwhile, Augustine, making use of the help of King Ethelbert, summoned the bishops and teachers of the neighboring British kingdom to a conference at a place which is called in English Augustineus Oak, that is Augustine's Oak, on the borders of Huis and the West Saxons. He proceeded to urge them with brotherly admonitions that they should preserve Catholic peace with him and undertake the joint labor of evangelizing the heathen for the Lord's sake. They did not keep Easter Sunday at the proper time, but from the 14th to the 20th day of the lunar month. This reckoning is based on an 84-year cycle. They did other things too, which were not in keeping with the unity of the church. After a long dispute, they were unwilling, in spite of the prayers, exhortations, and rebukes of Augustine and his companions, to give their assent, preferring their own traditions to those in which all the churches throughout the world agree. So Augustine organizes something where he brings someone in to be healed, and they pray for those Celtic bishops. They pray for the people, the man, he's a blind man, and Augustine prays for him as well. They are unable to heal the man, but through Augustine, God does in fact heal this blind man. And following that, it says, "Then the Britons confessed that they realized that it was the true way of righteousness which Augustine preached, but they could not disown their former customs without the consent and approval of their own people. They therefore asked that a conference should be held for a second time, and that more should attend." So as we're kind of going through this, you do see a very Orthodox thing where this understanding of the Orthodox Church today as a continuing of this same church that represents both St. Augustine and the Celtic Britons, that the Celtic British bishops, that they said they have to go back and consult with their people first. This is represented, a very probably overused scenario is the Council of Florence, where the bishops agree with that the Orthodox, the Constantinople, and the other, kind of, we'll say Greek for lack of a better term, the Greek Orthodox bishops, that they would conform to the Catholic Church, and they would accept the ecclesiastical hierarchy of Rome. St. Mark of Ephesus is there at Florence, and he says it's not even an option. This was not the faith passed down to us. And he seems polite in the writings and things that I've read, but he just simply says this is not the faith that we've inherited. This is not the faith that was passed down. So he goes back to Constantinople, and the people reject the rulings of the bishops, and which they did in order to gain assistance from the West under the direction of the Pope. And so it ends up going well for Constantinople. Constantinople falls as a result of its refusal to accept the ecclesiastical hierarchy, and it is overtaken by the Ottoman Empire a short time later. All right, so when this had been decided upon, it is related that the 7 British bishops and many learned men came, chiefly from their most famous monastery, which the English call Bonkenkorenberg, or Bangor Iscoed. At that time, it is said to have been ruled over by Abbot Denut. As they were about to set out for the conference, they went first to a certain holy and prudent man who lived as a hermit among them, to consult him as to whether they ought to forsake their own traditions at the bidding of Augustine. He answered, "If he is a man of God, follow him." They replied, "But how can we tell?" He answered, "The Lord said, 'Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart.' If this Augustine is meek and lowly of heart, it is to be supposed that he himself bears the yoke of Christ, and is offering it to you to bear. But if he is harsh and proud, it follows that he is not from God, and we have no need to regard his words." Once more they said, "But how can we know even this?" He said, "Contrive that he and his followers arrive first at the meeting place, and if he rises on your approach, you will know that he is a servant of Christ, and will listen to him obediently. But if he despises you and is not willing to rise in your presence, even though your numbers are greater, you should despise him in return." They did as he had said. Now it happened that Augustine remained seated while they were coming in. When they saw this, they forthwith became enraged, and setting him down as a proud man, strove to contradict everything he said. Then he said to them, "You do many things which are contrary to our customs, or rather to the customs of the universal church. Nevertheless, if you are willing to submit to me in 3 points, we will gladly tolerate all else that you do, even though it is contrary to our customs. The 3 points are to keep Easter at the proper time, to perform the sacrament of baptism, whereby we are born again to God, according to the rites of the Holy Roman and Apostolic Church, and to preach the word of the Lord to the English people in fellowship with us. They answered that they would do none of these things, nor would they accept him as their archbishop, saying between themselves that if he was even unwilling to rise at their approach now, he would despise them much more if they were to begin to give way to him. It is said that Augustine, the man of God, warned them with threats that if they refused to accept peace from their brethren, they would have to accept war from their enemies. And if they would not preach the way of life to the English nation, they would one day suffer the vengeance of death at their hands. This, through the workings of diverse judgment, came to pass in every particular as he had foretold. For later on, when that very powerful king of the English, Aethelfrith, whom we have already spoken of, collected a great army against the city of the legions, which is called Lancaster by the English, and more correctly Carelion or Chester by the Britons, and made a great slaughter of that nation of heretics. All right, I am quickly coming to the end of this chapter, and I think that's as far as we will go, but just to finish off, when he was about to give battle and saw their priest, who had assembled to pray to God on behalf of the soldiers taking part in the fight, standing apart in a safer place, he asked who they were and for what purpose they had gathered there. Most of them were from the monastery of Bangor, where there it was said to be a great number of monks, that when it was divided into 7 parts with superiors over each, no division had less than 300 men, all of whom were accustomed to live by the labor of their hands. After a 3 days' fast, most of these had come to the battle in order to pray with the others. They had a guard named Brockmel, whose duty it was to protect them against the barbarians' swords while they were praying. When Aethelfrith heard that they had come, he said, "If they are praying to their God against us, then, even if they do not bear arms, they are fighting against us, assailing us to do with prayers for their defeat, or our defeat, for our defeat." So he ordered them to be attacked first, and then he destroyed the remainder of their wicked host, though not without heavy losses. It is said that this battle, about 1,200 men were slain and had come to pray, and only 50 escaped by flight. Brockmel and his men, at the first enemy attack, turned their backs on those whom they should have defended, leaving them unarmed and helpless before the swords of their foes. Thus the prophecy of the holy Bishop Augustine was fulfilled, although he had long been translated to the heavenly kingdom, namely, that those heretics would also suffer the vengeance of temporal death because they had despised to offer of everlasting salvation. So, obviously, this ends poorly for the Britons. But what's I kind of want to bring out, and the reason that I'm reading from this section of the ecclesiastical history, is so that you do see that, in fact, St. Augustine's argument against the Celtic Britons was not that they needed to do what he said because it was what the Pope said. This was not part of the argument. And then likewise, that they did not see the fact that St. Augustine of Canterbury, as a representative under the Bishop of Rome, that because he had this relationship to Rome, that they were obligated to follow it. Neither of these is true. If this were today and these were parts of the church, then that would be the argument of the Catholic Church. But the argument of the Orthodox Church would be very much like what we see of St. Augustine here, speaking to those Celtic Britons. So I guess I bring this up because when my family or other people, Irish people that I know, they say, "Oh, I have to follow the faith of my fathers." That the faith of your fathers is the Orthodox faith as it has been handed down through the Orthodox Church, whether it be Greek, Russian, or whatever the case may be, Romanian, that the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church has its root found in the Orthodox Church still today, and with God's help will continue to do so until the end of the age, and at which time Christ will reign supreme over all. So hopefully I've said all of that correctly, and hopefully that kind of gives you further looks into those ancient Celtic bishops and the Celtic Church. Eventually the Celtic Church in its fullness does fall to invading Normans as well as other people, and it comes under the Bishop of Rome. And so, but that took many hundreds of years before that would happen, even after this. I don't really have too much more to say on that. I don't know that I'm going to continue to talk about the church and the Pope. I've given lots of information why I do not believe in the modern concept of the Pope, the way that it's laid out according to Vatican I and Vatican II. Of course, the first 20-some, 50, I don't know, it's the first several many centuries of popes of Rome are canonized saints in the Orthodox Church today. So I wouldn't say we don't accept the Pope. We would accept the ecclesiastical authority of the Pope if he rejoined the Orthodox Church and conceded to Orthodox theology. But until that happens, then we can't do that. I wish that we could. I wish that there was a unified church. I wish that the Orthodox and Catholic churches could truthfully say that we have one theology again, that we could do away with the heresies as we pray in the liturgy of Saint Basil the Great. But until we can do that, I can't make that claim, and that's disheartening to me, because I do want the unity of the church. But having taught in a Catholic school this past year and seen the traditions the way they're kept today, I see kids entering the altar space without any regard to the bishop. I see kids leaning against the altar and touching it at all. This is something that would be unheard of in the Orthodox Church. As an Orthodox layperson who assists behind the altar, I would not touch the altar. But in the Catholic Church, I saw kids going up and leaning against it. I see kids going up there to receive, going into the altar space to during communion, entering freely and out according girls or boys. I've seen we always had some differences in tradition where they had returned to the pre-Christian concept of unleavened bread and accepting the wafer, as opposed to the Orthodox tradition of having leavened bread, showing that Christ had risen. But now they no longer even accept that on the tongue. They are given the wafer themselves, and they eat it and drink some of the wine. And just the whole, many of the aspects of these teachings and our understanding, they seem to continue to grow further in the chasm that separates our church with, and I think that in some degree, I don't want to make like a low blow, but there's been quite a number of Catholic priests that were did morally reprehensible acts and things against children with sexual things with children, pedophiles. And this is, if it were, a few here and there and this had happened, then that would be tragic. But the numbers of priests that have been indicted and found to be a legitimate accusation against them is numbering in the thousands upon thousands. So this shows a sickness within that church that now calls itself the Catholic Church. And so I think, and that's not to say that there aren't things that go on in the Orthodox Church too. There are priests who commit sexual adulteries, but usually it's with an adult woman, and not that that's not sinful. It is, it most certainly is, but it is less morally reprehensible than the pedophilia that exists amongst the bishops under the Catholic Church. So I guess where I'm kind of going with that is that I don't know that we should want to rejoin communion with that church. Those are acts that are so evil and so far off that, and they're so largely represented in the extremely large numbers that exist amongst them, that I think that it does represent the Catholic Church. It represents the modern Catholic Church under the Pope in Rome, and that, well, just as John writes the letters that Christ tells him to write to the churches, that some of them, their lampstands would be removed. I can't say whose lampstands are removed and where the light of Christ has gone out in certain places, but with the number of pedophile priests that exist within the Catholic Church being in the thousands upon thousands worldwide, I would not be surprised to find out that Christ had removed their lampstand, and that's why they're able to commit such satanic evil within their clergy, within bishops of their church. So we do have our own issues in the Orthodox Church. We have some archbishops that are even advocating for indecent acts with men, conspiring with men in their lusts. But apart from that one bishop, you don't see that very often. And when you do, he's condemned by the Orthodox Church, by the Orthodox faithful. And we have the ability to do that, to call out sin. In the Catholic Church, if the Pope were to do something like that, or there are many of their bishops who commit those indecent acts, there is some degree where they have to accept that the Pope is the successor, they claim, the unique successor of Peter. We would say that the authority of Peter is passed on to all of the bishops. And in fact, I think we would really argue that the Pope is not one of those bishops, because he has cut himself off from the church by rejecting Orthodox teaching. So, I could go on and on and on and repeat those same things for days and hours and, ongoing. And it would never change any aspect of it. But I hope that has, at least if you're a Catholic subscriber, that's giving you some indication of why I, as an Orthodox Christian, and I think most Orthodox Christians, we look to the Orthodox Church and say that this is the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and that it is one, that there's not 2, 3, 4, or 1,000 one holy Catholic and Apostolic churches, but there is one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. So without further ado, I will be back in time. If you have videos that you would like to see, or questions or anything like that, please post it in the description box below. Remember to subscribe, and I will see you guys in a video coming very soon.